Welcome to Supply Chain Talks. Today we are doing our first one-on-one discussion session. Our topic of discussion today is importance of visibility in supply chain during COVID-19. Now, this is a very important topic from the perspective that the whole world is now going through the pandemic of coronavirus. And during this session, we are going to look at how the visibility in supply chain can support organization to sail through this pandemic. So for this discussion, joining me is Mr. Saqib Zaidi from Pakistan. So I would like now, Mr. Saqib, if you can please introduce yourself, and then we will begin our discussion on the topic.
Assalamu alaikum and hi. My name is Saqib Zaidi. I have over 12 years of experience in supply chain and operations. I have served some multinational companies, including Siemens, and I have worked in Middle East as well in the field of supply chain and operations, and I have been mainly associated with some continuous improvement projects within the supply chain. So today we are going to talk about the importance of visibility in the current scenario of COVID-19. Why visibility is important? What is visibility? We will go through with the definition of visibility first, and then we will go link it with the current scenario, how the things are moving, and how the uncertainties are coming up, and how we can apply the particular kind of knowledge or skill set in order to cope up with these uncertainties and improve our supply chain.
So, Saqib, to start off the discussion, I think the most important and pertinent question about this topic is that how would you define visibility? What exactly do you mean by visibility in supply chain?
Yeah, visibility is all over the supply chain. It comes from the demand visibility. The earlier you predict or earlier you know the demand, the need of procurement is something. And it is something about knowing how and where your inventory is at a particular time, how well the components, parts, and the products in transit can be traced, and how the manufacturer, for example, can do the manufacturing, and it can be transferred to the final destination. So if you have an eye on throughout the supply chain, if you have some eye, then you can always modify, you can always be flexible within the supply chain, which is very important to counter the impacts of COVID in terms of uncertainties, in terms of unreliability, which many of the organizations are facing now.
Fine. Agree with you. Yes, visibility gives the supply chain the power or the strength of being agile, being adaptable, and being flexible. So from that point of view, that if you look at the current market dynamics which have come about due to COVID-19, so how would you place, what is your view on the current market dynamics, and how does visibility help in that?
Yeah, but again, coming back to the point, visibility is something which balances the supply and demand, and it allows you to rapidly respond to the disruptions in the supply chain. And it optimizes your process and in order to manage the local and global suppliers. And coming back to your question, since you know that the market is changing every day now, the demands are highly fluctuable these days, and there are problems with the demand, with the customers, with the availability of funds with the customers. I mean, lack of funds and overall economic situation over the globe is impacting the demand cycle as well. So market dynamics is changing, customer perspective is also changing, and even most of the countries, when they are finished up with the peak of the COVID, they are basically coming towards the second shock of COVID. The first shock was very dynamic, there was some panic buying over there. There was some lockdowns, shutdowns, economic activities fell really slowed down. Yeah, slowed down, and now the world is coming towards the second shock of from the market or customer's perspective, where the demand is not very much visible and is not very much certain due to lack of funds. Some of it are on hold. Most of the projects are on hold, some new projects, some new avenues are being sought by health organizations, for example, some new projects in order to, I mean, in the change direction, for example, in information technology are being started, and they will further speed up. On the other hand, I mean, it is very important to understand in which market are you in, and which kind of customers you are serving. So, for example, I'll give you two, three examples. There is an example when most of the when the COVID hit Pakistan, there was a surge in requirement and demand of masks. Most of the importers in our country high price as compared to what it means. And meanwhile, when the deliveries start to come, we have the manufacturing setup spread out all over Pakistan, which reduce the price of local masks drastically. And when those importers have those masks available in their hand, the cost of those masks were pretty higher than the market price. Which industry are you in? What can be changed or what is being changed? And you keep a constant eye on what are the things driving the price, driving the cost of the material as well. And how you can serve better in the changing environment.
Correct. I think, Saqib, you have touched a very important point, because lack of visibility gives rise to a very famous concept of supply chain, which is bullwhip. And this is what we have seen and experienced, that due to lack of visibility, due to these uncertainties in the market, bullwhips came into effect all across the globe. And the example that you gave, that the importers brought in masks at a higher price because there was a supply and demand imbalance, and the panic buying happening, that is giving a wrong signal. And then higher inventory was brought in at a higher price, whereas at the same time, and another action was happening, which is another aspect of supply chain, that is going from global sourcing, the companies started looking inwards into their own countries and towards localization. And the local industries or SMEs started come up, they started answering to the call, and local productions started happening. So now the local inventory is also available, you have local production available, you have inventory coming from outside. So due to this bullwhip, the importers, in my opinion, were left with higher inventories at higher costs, and they could not, how would I put it, liquidate that and liquidate in the market, and losses were incurred. So again, so from that perspective, I would like to again now take your point of view, that how do you see that how visibility can support these inventory levels now within the organization, in the market, with the suppliers? How can visibility support?
Yeah, very important point that inventory has increased for the overall. I mean, there is a gap or imbalance between demand and supply, and inventory, which is with high cost, is increased significantly. For example, if we talk about the case of mask. So it is very important, as I said earlier, that to know where your inventory, where your components are at any particular time. If there is an imbalance between inventory and in demand and supply, which is resulting in increase in inventory, not only for the global or from the global suppliers, but local imbalance is also in place. I will give you another example of inventory invisibility or inventory problems when happened during the COVID. You remember we have Eid during last month, where there were a lot of orders towards the clothing industry. I mean, some big brands. The market suddenly shifted towards panic buying through online or e-commerce. The situation, the companies were not fully equipped with the desired value of the desired amount of inventory. What happened? They reached towards their stores and picked up the inventory from there, and And meanwhile, since that there was a lack of visibility, there were many errors, many uncertainties happened. And most of us, or most of the customers who placed orders through e-commerce were not able to get their orders on time. And so inventory is very important to be made visible, not only for the consumption time, not only for the consumption time, but also the orders. I mean, the demand can should be balanced with the inventory. And inventory management has received their first shock when panic buying started just after COVID hit at most of the regions of the world. If you talk about some general stores, there was shortage of some basic necessities in some of the areas of the world, and there was sudden increase of inventory because again what you are saying, that the bullwhip effect came into play. One more important point, doing the inventory while you are making your inventory more visible, it is very important that you have right payment terms set up with your suppliers for the raw material, for the equipment, or for the trading which we are doing. Uh, since everybody knows that most of the organizations are lacking their funds, there are high amount of uncertainties, there are high amount of unreliability in the payment, and the interest rates might go up during this second phase of second shock or second phase of COVID on the supply chain. So you have to see the payment terms in terms of the balance between inventory, keeping the cost of keeping inventory, and the cost of investing on that supply, or investing on the procurement which you are doing.
Agree with you on this, Saqib, that the inventory costs and payment terms and inventory holding costs, storage costs, and obviously the interest rates on the back of the lending costs needs to be taken into account whenever a decision is being done. And this also brings up a topic of what I like, which I prefer a lot, that as supply chain professionals and procurement professionals, we need to ensure that any decision that we take on inventory, on what to buy, should take into account the total cost of ownership. It really helps to understand that certain thing might look in the sense that it might be on a cheaper path, but if the payment terms are not right, and by that, if for example the payments are, for example, 30 days, and you got an excellent price, but the inventory will only be used after, for example, 3 months, because the demand has slipped down. So you are actually paying for the material even before it gets processed, and there's a cash flow in. So a cash flow out is happening before an inflow of cash. So that creates a disparity or a negative cash cycle for the organization, and that has a very big cost against the financial stability of the organization, the availability of liquid funds, and also with our own lending relationship with the bank. So, so true. So visibility has an impact on inventory, your payment terms, your cost of ownership, and these things. And again, to support this, in my view, that how we can support our situation is to have a sound relationship with our suppliers. We need to identify that who our key suppliers are, who should we talk to as partners. So from that perspective, Saqib, that how can visibility support an organization in identifying their partners and engaging with them in balancing out this disparity? How would I put this? The imbalance. How can this be sorted out, smoothed out?
Yeah, very good question, Noman. Relationship with suppliers and the visibility, your demands, visibility to the supplier was never important than today, because of the uncertainties again, because of the uncertainties which the people, which the suppliers might produce more or produce less. And in this scenario, there are a lot of uncertainties with suppliers as well. Their workforce, their material chain, their supply chain as well is highly disrupted. So the earlier you involve the supplier in the procurement process, the better it is. So, um, with this, having said that, relationship with supplier is very important. Your trust on the supplier and supplier trust on you is also very important, and it develops when you keep your books somewhere to your partners. And this is the very high time when you pick the right partners, when you pick the right suppliers to become your partners and contribute towards your success together with linked together with theirs.
Agree with you. And I would like to add one small point to it, that again, a supplier relationship management, or a good feedback or a transparent relationship with your supplier can support you to actually go towards the model of single sourcing. Now, a lot of organizations are a little scared of the concept of single sourcing, because that is like putting all your eggs in one basket. But if you have a sound relationship, if you the transparency is there, if you know what is happening at your partner or your supplier's end, if you know their processes, their inventories, their production plans, and they know your demand, so basically the supplier becomes an extended part of your own supply chain. It is not a separate company, but an extended part of your supply chain. In my how would I see it, is like backward integration without actually buying the entity, but working so closely together that it's part of you, it's part of the same body. So having said that, the lesson which I have learned during the pandemic is that yes, single sourcing is a very sound concept, and visibility can support to strengthen that concept. But uh, eh, to ensure to be adaptable and to be responsive under such grave circumstances like this pandemic, a combo of multi-sourcing and single sourcing can be used in the from the concept that you should always have a plan B and a plan C when it comes to suppliers or partners. That your one might be your primary partner, but always keep engaged a secondary partner as well, so that if something happens to the primary one, you can always fall back on the secondary partner as well, so that your supply chain doesn't disturb or doesn't disrupt. Uh, it might be at a certain higher cost, but continuity is more important sometimes than the cost impact. Uh, how would you see this? Do you agree with what I'm saying, or how would you like to put your thoughts on it?
My point of view, I certainly agree and somewhat disagree. Actually, from my point of view, why I'm saying this, because it depends on the commodity in which you are dealing. First, you need to see your commodity, how much risk you are carrying. If you are building one partner and which can build a monopolistic situation among your supply chain, within your supply chain. So, identifying the right commodity for partnership is very important, and nobody knows better than you or the company which is deciding for the partnership, or the supply chain manager who is deciding for the partnership, which commodity should possess less risk with the monopolistic situation and can benefit and efficiency. So I would place first the priority of right priority for the commodity, and then if you feel that if you have a certain amount of risk, then you must always have second or contingency plan, and which is very important. And we have seen over here as well during COVID situation that when China suddenly got into the lockdown after their New Year's Eve, uh, most of the world suffered. All of the supply chain operations suffered because there is no country who is not served by China. So,
Okay.
and it is said by French Minister of Economy as well that world have to now rethink on the supply chain model among the companies to be more independent and resilient.
Fine. Good points from Saqib. The last thing that I would like to discuss before we end our session on this topic today is that, as rightly identified by you, you quoted the French minister about the dependence on China, and the supply chains needs to look inwards again and upon their own strategies. So that brings me to the point of that. Do you think that this COVID has led supply chains to look really inwards and move, not exactly move, but to have to have a secondary setup as well, from globalization to localization? How would you see that? That, do you think now more importance would be given to localization of your key suppliers, or to your purchase, or to the sourcing of your key components, commodities, and materials?
Yeah, it is quite debatable topic. Actually, it is why I'm saying it is debatable, because globalization or international outsourcing is a topic which we have been studying, which we have been practicing, and it has brought a lot of benefits across the world. So because you are never expert, or you're not never logistically efficient in every part of the world. So bringing everything together or localized is can serve the country in the situation of in such a situation which we are facing, or which the world is facing right now. But it again, it depends on your commodity. It depends on what you are supplying, what you can do locally, and if it can be done locally, it has to be prioritized locally. And if it is not feasible, if it is not viable to do this localization, you have to work with the global suppliers. But again, in order to minimize the risk, global suppliers can be sourced from multiple other regions as well. Because once we had the outbreak in China, everything was closed. Then Europe came into the place where everything was started to shut down, or under the lockdown. Um, but the companies where we had some multiple outsourcing models, multiple global outsourcing models have really did well during this pandemic, and their operations although were disrupted to a certain extent, but not to the extent that they have completely had to halt.
Okay. I thank you, Saqib, for joining me in this discussion. I believe that our discussion on this topic was very productive and thought-provoking. And again, thank you from myself. Thank you from Supply Chain Talks for doing this session with us.